All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to get started right now. It's just 12:01, and people can trickle in as they come. But my name is Shweta Arya. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the outgoing executive director of Delaware Interfaith Power and Light. And I will have Aaron Sharp a wave here so everybody can see him. He's the new incoming executive director.
Hello, everyone. Excited to join this conversation today.
Thanks, Aaron. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon and joining us. I see very many familiar faces, but there are some new people. So I will just do a quick intro about IPL and then dive in the conversation. So Delaware Interfaith Power and Light, we are one of the 40 state affiliates of National IPL. And our shared mission is to address the climate crisis. And here in Delaware, we do that through our programs that help congregations reduce their carbon footprint. We also work on climate education and advancing climate policy. And one of our programs is Climate Conversation. This is to really create more education on climate change and really change the narrative of doom and gloom to something that is filled with hope and solutions, and really empowering people with knowledge. I think that's what is lacking right now, that people don't know how climate change is impacting all of us in our everyday lives. So through these conversations, we bring different perspective on climate change. So Climate Conversation program is funded by Energize Delaware. Energize Delaware is a state-funded nonprofit. You can check them out at energizedelaware.org. They help individuals, nonprofit businesses get climate resilience and energy efficient. So you can really check out their programs. They have lots of funding available for everybody. So loan programs and other programs, which are really, really great. So we're very thankful for this partnership. Climate Conversation program, we have been doing these climate conversations for the past few years. We have actually done over 70 climate conversations so far, some online, some in person, and we have engaged more than 2,700 people. So it's really amazing how far we have gotten through this program. Today, this afternoon's climate conversation is on gas stoves and how they impact our health and climate. And we have some really fantastic speakers lined up who will share their expertise. Gas stoves controversy really started more beginning of this year. And personally, I've never really paid attention to it, but I know that researchers have been doing their research for a decade on how these gas stoves are injurious to our health and are polluting the indoor, creating indoor pollution. But thanks to this controversy, all these facts came out, and now we know that the latest research says that 13% of asthma cases in children are related to gas stoves or indoor home cooking, which is huge. And there's also direct correlation to if the many states who have more gas stoves in their homes, they also have higher cases of asthma. So there's direct correlation, and it is so significant. And I really feel guilty. I'm one of those guilty lovers of gas stoves. I mean, I've seen my mom cook on gas stoves all my life, and I'm Indian, and I do my Indian cooking, and I used to love my gas stoves until now. Now I've definitely been more careful. I open the windows when I cook and all that stuff, and I will make that transition to induction soon. But knowledge is power, and I'm so thankful that Today, we have some great speakers who will share their insight on what the truth is. Let's stick with the science. Let's listen to the people who are doing their due diligence and research in this field. So without any further ado, I would like to call our first speaker, and let me pull out the introduction. And our very first speaker is Dr. Abby Nerlinger, MD, MPH, is a pediatric hospitalist at Nemours Children's Hospital in Delaware and assistant professor of pediatrics at Sidney Kimmel Medical College and Thomas Jefferson University. She also serves as the program director for the Pediatric Hospital Medicine Fellowship, the medical director for community engagement and scholarship for the Nemours Value-Based Services Organization, and serves as the Nemours site lead for the Delaware CTR-XL Community Engagement and Outreach Core. Dr. Nerlinger has experience in legislative and community advocacy, specifically in the areas of pediatric environmental health and healthcare finance. She sits on the executive committee of the American Academy of Pediatrics Council on Environmental Health. So with that, we're so grateful, Abby, to have you on this panel discussion today. So please take it away.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to just go ahead and share my screen. Hang on one second. And then I can get to the slideshow. Okay, great. Hopefully everyone can see slides. Okay, sounds good. So I'm going to talk through this, and then hopefully at the end we can have a little bit more discussion, because I do think it's a very interesting topic. So to kick this off with thinking a little bit about gas stoves and health, I'm coming at this from my perspective as a pediatrician. So a lot of the studies I will talk about will be studies that have been done in kids, but knowing that children grow into adults, clearly there's implications for adult health as well. I wanted to highlight a few resources from the American Academy of Pediatrics, which does, if anyone's interested, by the way, have lots of resources that are generated through their Council on Environmental Health and Climate Change. The first is a policy statement on climate change from 2015, which is actually currently undergoing revision. But they do mention in this, failure to take prompt substantive action would be an injustice to all children. A paradigm shift in the production and consumption of energy is both a necessity and an opportunity for major innovation, job creation, and significant immediate associated health benefits. Pediatricians have a uniquely valuable role to play in the societal response to this global challenge. So, there is increasing push from the American Academy of Pediatrics to have pediatricians increasingly engaged in climate change and what it means for the families that we serve. This is sort of when I was thinking about gas stoves and the contributions to air pollution and climate change and how this interacts with sort of the health effects, I wanted to just lay out this framework. So fossil fuel combustion, including through gas stoves, generates both indoor and then other sources of fossil fuel combustion generate outdoor air pollution, which leads to greenhouse gas production. I wanted to reiterate, though, that gas stoves have implications for climate change, which in themselves can cause health effects for children through effects on air quality, water quality, infectious disease outbreaks, and extreme weather events. And they can directly affect children's health in the indoor air environment. And so we'll talk a little bit about both those things and what that means. Air pollution and children's health. So children spend 80 to 90% of their time indoors. And it's important to think about all of the indoor environments where they may be exposed to indoor allergens. So not just at home, but also schools and any indoor play settings, early childhood education settings. So there's multiple settings where this potentially comes into play. Not only gas stoves, but also other indoor allergens may interact with the pollutants may interact with the pollutants that gas stoves create, including particulates and other vapors and allergens. And this will become important when we think about the health effects. In this talk specifically, we're going to think a little bit more about combustion sources, so particulates and nitrogen dioxide generated through tobacco smoke, gas stoves, wood stove, and gas appliances. Like I mentioned, there are both direct health effects from the use of gas stove, and we need to keep in mind too their contributions to climate change. The American Academy of Pediatrics has 2 additional resources on both ambient air pollution and individual environmental control practices and asthma management, but neither of these directly address the regulation of gas stoves. So I imagine we'll be hearing a little bit more about that from the AAP with how much it's been sort of in the news and current events lately. So gas stoves and indoor air pollution. Greater than a third of US households use gas stoves for cooking. They contribute to indoor air pollution through both combustion and then leaking of natural gas through unburned natural gas if the stove is not being used. And specifically, I wanted to think about sort of nitrogen oxides, nitrogen dioxide, and nitric oxide, because I think these are probably the exposures that you hear most about in the news. We do know that gas stoves contribute to increased levels of nitrogen dioxide and nitric oxide in homes. So summarizing a few studies, nitrogen dioxide concentrations are higher in homes with gas stoves than without gas stoves. Without ventilation, levels in homes can exceed EPA, the outdoor threshold for nitrogen dioxide, which is set at 100 parts per billion. There's no indoor air threshold. Emissions from gas stoves are linearly related to the amount of gas burned, and we know that nitrogen dioxide is a lower respiratory tract irritant, and I'll talk in a second about what that means for health implications. Gas stoves can also release particulates, which have implications for children's health, benzene, which we know is our carcinogen, and carbon monoxide. In terms of contributions to outdoor air pollution, nitrogen oxides can contribute both to the formation of particulates and the formation of acid rain, and climate change contributions, which we'll hear more about. The natural gas combustion through gas stoves can contribute to greenhouse gas production, and then methane, which can be released both through the production of natural gas that's used to heat the stoves, and then also methane can leak through stoves that are being not used. So multiple different indoor air pollution sources to think about. I wanted to make this slide just to highlight, why there's some confusion in terms of the studies and different findings linking these exposures to nitrogen oxide with health effects, right? So we know that homes that have gas stoves have higher levels of nitrogen dioxide, but why is it so difficult, and why are we hearing so many sort of opinions almost about whether or not these exposures are related to health effects? So I've highlighted here just a general principle in toxicology. We need to identify that a hazard is present, that a chemical can have an effect on health. There needs to be an exposure happening, so a person needs to be exposed to that chemical, and that in combination generates a risk. So when you think about all of the factors that can go into whether or not a chemical poses a hazard to someone's health, when it comes to nitrogen dioxide, this can mean multiple different things. So one, does that person who's exposed have chronic medical conditions like a child with asthma? Do they have a history of prematurity? So we know that children with prematurity have increased reactivity in their lungs that can predispose them to reacting to certain allergens. Is it an adult with COPD that's being exposed? What is the age? So we know that children, pregnant women, and the elderly are at increased risk of health effects through exposure to nitrogen dioxide. Specific populations, which I mentioned a little bit about. And also, there's a difference in some of these studies in terms of how the disease is measured. So when you think about asthma, there are so many different ways when researchers are studying it that you can measure severity of asthma. Are you looking at family self-reportive symptoms? Are you looking at how many times the child was admitted to the hospital? Are you looking at more objective measures like the asthma control test results or their pulmonary function testing? So it's really hard to compare asthma outcomes because when researchers are looking at these studies, they're comparing so many different things. In terms of the exposure, there are also different levels of exposure that children or families may encounter when they have a gas stove in their home. So some studies look at just the presence of a gas stove in the home, whereas other studies actually look at the nitrogen dioxide levels that the family was exposed to. Also, many times these exposures are multifactorial, so we know that there may be other combustion sources in the home, like environmental tobacco smoke. The season is highly influential, especially if families are using gas stoves to heat their homes. The size of the kitchen can make a difference, whether or not these are acute versus chronic exposures, the duration of exposure, how frequently the families are using them, and of course, whether or not they're using ventilation. So when you're looking at all of these studies, it's really hard to compare them because each of these factors can be different among the studies that generates a different estimation of what the risk is. So to think a little bit more about the health effects specifically of nitrogen dioxide that is released from gas stoves, I think overall, studies can generally agree that these are pollutants of concern that warrant mitigating the exposure. The evidence of health effects is generally stronger in children. And overall, studies have shown that higher indoor nitrogen dioxide concentrations and/or gas stove use without ventilation is linked to increased asthma severity in children, increased severity of COPD in adults, and increased respiratory infections in children. But I will caution in terms of the interpretation of these studies as well, that many of these, because of the study design, we can only conclude that these are associations between exposure and health effects and not direct causation. In order to do direct causation, we would need either more advanced statistical methods or, for example, a randomized controlled trial, which many of these are not, because it's a little bit difficult to randomize children to exposure versus no exposure to nitrogen dioxide, because we're not going to intentionally expose children to gas stoves. That makes sense. So there have been, and this is one thing that Shota was referring to, a couple big meta-analyses that have attempted to summarize through a statistical method, which is what meta-analysis is, the results of all of these studies, since they are so disparate. The first one, meta-analysis of the effects of indoor nitrogen dioxide and gas cooking on asthma and wheeze in children, found that the odds ratio for gas cooking exposure and having asthma, so the association between having a gas stove and having asthma, was 1.32. So 1.32 times more likely to have asthma if you had a gas stove in your home. And then the odds ratio for indoor nitrogen dioxide exposure and just having wheeze, you were 1.15 times higher risk of having current wheeze. The other more recent meta-analysis, well, it wasn't more recent meta-analysis looked at the population attributable fraction of gas stoves and childhood asthma in the United States. And this was using population level data. So a little bit different thing to keep in mind. It was using the results of the American Housing Survey. And their conclusion was that 12.7% of current household asthma in the US is attributed to gas stove risk. There were a few barriers of this study, though, that the authors do address. One of the most significant being that the study assumed that all risk factors of exposure were equal. So, for example, a family reporting exposure to environmental tobacco smoke was equal to having a gas stove in the house, when this, for example, may not be true depending on how frequently the gas stove was used or how frequently the child was exposed to environmental tobacco smoke. So there's still a lot of variables that may not have been measured that could go into this. So based on all of that, what as pediatricians can we tell families? And more resources coming out on this. Some of these recommendations specifically are from a group called New York Clinicians for Climate Action and the New York State American Academy of Pediatrics. And again, it's hard to sort of say that these are evidence-based recommendations because there are limited studies linking these interventions to improve health outcomes. We know that, for example, ventilation can decrease nitrogen dioxide levels in the kitchen while you're cooking, but there aren't a ton of studies that actually link that decrease in levels to improved health outcomes for children with asthma. But what we can recommend based on the mechanisms of how nitrogen dioxide works is to recommend using ventilation when you're using gas stoves. Based on NHANES data, only 21% of families or children living in houses with gas stoves use the exhaust ventilation when they're cooking with them, which is sort of eye-opening. So making recommendations that families either open windows, or if they have a fume hood, especially, or exhaust fan that it exhausts to the outside, using that whenever they're using the gas stove, using the gas stove less often. So if you can use different methods of cooking, which I think we'll hear a little bit more about, and then replacing the gas stove is possible, but we realize this may not be possible for all of the families that we interact with. One study did show 40 to 50% reductions in indoor nitrogen dioxide when gas stoves were replaced with electric. And ventilation in this specific study was associated with reduced childhood asthma risk. But again, this was population level data. We also consider recommending air purifiers with HEPA filters, and then also never using a gas stove for ambient heat. So resources for families who are interested in learning more, talking with pediatricians, since pediatricians are receiving increasing training when it comes to environmental health and climate change, looking at healthcare institutions. So there's more and more outreach going on within healthcare institutions in the state to address environmental health factors. I myself am involved in one of our statewide research networks, and one of the community concerns that has been raised to us were those surrounding environmental health. So there is some research going on when it comes to specifically outdoor air pollution. And then pediatric environmental health specialty units were the last thing I just wanted to touch on. So these pediatric environmental health specialty units, or PACEUs, are regional units that are designed to field questions from anyone in the community, whether that be pediatricians, families, concerned parents, schools, that they have questions about environmental exposures that might be affecting children's health. Our Region 3 unit, the academic affiliation is at Villanova University, and they have environmental health experts there that you can send a question by email, and they can sort of help you get to the bottom of the answer. So for example, if you have concerns about exposures in schools, you can send a question and they'll help figure out whether or not there's actually a risk or concern to children's health. So just to end, hopefully on a positive note, that a proactive step towards environmental sustainability can help improve health outcomes, well-being, and health equity for the patients and communities that pediatricians serve. That's it.
Thank you so much, Abby, and that was really great. Specifically, that figure that only 21% of the families are using ventilator in their homes while cooking. And I probably was one of them. I never used my ventilator cooking. It makes so much noise. I'm like, I'd rather not use it, but not anymore. But that was really great. And I love to have a health practitioner on a climate panel. I think it's just so much more impactful to hear from a health practitioner to really think about fossil fuels in a very different way. So I'm sure we'll be discussing that, but I will now invite our next panelist, John Michael Cross from EESI. And I want to introduce you, John. John Michael is with the Environmental and Energy Study Institute, EESI, a DC-based nonprofit. He's the project manager of EESI's Access Clean Energy Savings Program that works with rural electric co-ops and public utilities to develop member-focused on-bill financing and beneficial electrification program. He has been with EESI since 2011. John Michael, the stage is all yours. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Glad to be here, everybody. Thanks for having me. I forgot that I put all my notes for my intro slide into my bio, so I'm gonna skip ahead. All right, so I think I speak for everybody here that using fossil fuels is great. Nothing beats taking a quick work break to go add another pint of gas to your laptop. Or firing up your 2-stroke motorized toothbrush and just really going after that plaque. Or maybe, and again, this is just maybe, you prefer taking advantage of 100 years of advancements in electric technology. to each their own. Maybe a little ridiculous, but it's really not that far off from how many of us cook. And we were just in the last presentation, I got a great view of what we're throwing into our living spaces by cooking with natural gas. So just it's very regional, or at least there are a lot of differences around the country. So I just want to cover that here first. About 61% of American homes use natural gas in some form. And 38% of homes in the US have a gas stove or a cooktop, or most likely both. And so you can see kind of how it's oddly distributed there. There's plenty of reasons why. One of my rules today is to talk about the climate impact of cooking with natural gas. Natural gas is primarily methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. Depending on what metric you use, you can say that methane is 25 times more potent than CO2 on a pound per pound basis. But I think what's really important to remember about methane is that its climate impact is not properly accounted for when you look at greenhouse gas inventories, because whether it's gas leaks in the extraction or anywhere in the distribution system, like gas leaks, and that does not get accounted for at all in official greenhouse gas inventories. We basically count like the gas that gets used at the power plant, or that hits like certain distribution waypoints, but it's there's a lot that gets out that we're not accounting for. But at the same time, to be perfectly honest, cooking represents a very small percentage of household energy use. You can see this chart here from the Energy Information Agency. That's not what the A stands for, I can't remember. But from this is out of DOE, color coded to different types of energy, how we use it in the home. It is space and water heating are the main culprits of how we use energy, whether that's from electricity or natural gas. And so that is also then where the climate impact is primarily in the home. Cooking is down there. But then also let's just talk about the efficiencies of different type of heating types. I covered before that most of us use electric heating. The majority of the US uses electric heating, electricity for cooking, but the energy use, the energy consumption is higher total for the US out of gas. And that is because electric cooking is roughly 3 times more efficient than gas. And then, and that's not even to include induction cooking. Induction cooking is a little bit more efficient, maybe on the 5% range, according to some studies, more efficient than your conventional electric resistance units. But so energy use totals aside, cooking has a role in climate solutions that goes way beyond its direct impact. And that's because cooking drives a lot of consumer opinions about energy use in the home, and just generally there's a lot of emotion and conversation built in to stoves, as we saw when things kind of hit the news cycle back in January. So cooking is going to be a critical piece around the effort to electrify buildings. It's kind of hard to electrify a building if you still need to pump in natural gas to run the stove. So a decarbonization strategy, a big one is going electrify everything. It's the idea that electricity is just a much more climate-friendly way to run our economy. And that's not to say the grid doesn't have its own problems. There's a lot of efforts to try to clean up the grid as much as possible, but it is getting better. Like the carbon intensity of the grid goes down every year. And if you have an electric appliance that runs off the grid, that means your electric appliance has a lower carbon intensity every year. And as opposed to if you say install a new gas stove or other appliance, then that carbon intensity is not going to change for the lifetime of that unit. So the idea of electrify everything and then clean up that electricity while you're at it is going to be a critical part of how we meet our climate goals. So here I have a slide that my organization put together about beneficial electrification. I think there was a presentation you all had on BE, beneficial electrification, not too long ago. And that's the idea that we do want to electrify everything, but there are certain things that make more sense to do now. whether, low hanging fruit, as it were. So this is a definition that folks use for what constitutes beneficial electrification. It's a measure that saves money, that benefits the environment, that improves quality of life, and makes the grid stronger. And it doesn't have to necessarily be all those things, but it can do those things without, can maybe say do 3 of the 4 without harming the 4th. And that's, I think, where we see stoves coming in a big way. An electric stove isn't going to save you a lot of money, just because there's also just not that much energy use out of the stove in the first place, but it's going to improve your quality of life. It's going to benefit the environment. So yeah, getting your stove to converting to electric is definitely more beneficial electrification, and therefore a part of the climate strategy. Won't go into that too much more, but if you're interested, I led a project in my organization putting together a big website called the Beneficial Electrification Toolkit, the toolkit.org. Have at it if you're interested. Okay, so to stoves and the stove wars, as some people called them, that started back in January. So what happened there? Like, what actually was? How did that all get started? So there is something called the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission, made up of 5 commissioners that are appointed by the president. I think right now we have a couple appointees from the current administration and some from the previous. And one of those commissioners was giving an interview, and he said, "This is a hidden hazard," meaning the health impact of gas stoves. Any option is on the table. Products that can't be made safe can be banned. Said that in an interview, not an official proceeding, but conservative media got hold of that, and it was just off to the races. That they're coming for your stove. They're going to pry my stove from my cold, dead hands. All of that. But there is actually no federal policy in the works. The agency clarified soon after that it's only researching gas emissions from stoves. And what this commission does is it primarily issues consumer warnings and sets up voluntary recalls. Every once in a while, they'll ban a product, but it takes a lot. Like they were part of the effort to ban asbestos in the country, but even that took a lot of research, a lot of efforts, and it's just not where gas stoves are going. Now, there are certain gas bans happening around the country. So 2 different sides here. So on the left, we see where there are new construction gas bans in state and local governments from around the country. So there's 70 local governments in California that I didn't list here, and then this is everybody else that has done it so far. So some of the big ones are New York City, Washington, D.C., Seattle. Actually, the entire state of Washington has issued a ban of new construction can't pipe in gas. Though there are some exceptions for gas stoves. I'm actually not entirely clear on how that would even work, but that is there. Then on the right side here is this chart's a little bit dated, but in the red are states that have passed bans of bans. They have said that you are not allowed to ban natural gas into new construction. And so this sprung up a couple of years ago after the first town, Berkeley, California, passed their gas ban. And so we're basically ending up in the kind of a very, effectively like a red and blue setup of whether we're going to be banning gas in new construction or, again, banning the ban. So new development, just maybe 2 weeks ago now, a federal appeals court struck down Berkeley's natural gas ban. What's going to happen? And that's probably going to keep going through the courts. How's that going to apply to other places doing this sort of thing? We don't really know, but this is kind of a very active thing that's happening right now. So, but there are different ways to make change through policy. There's sticks and carrots. So before, those were the sticks we were talking about. But what about carrots? What about incentives? And so this is where the Inflation Reduction Act comes in a big way. So this bill passed back in August, and one of the things it includes are home energy rebates. So here we have a great graphic that I stole from another nonprofit. Good job, Mosaic. So this makes these rebates available to homes. They're not available yet. It's coming soon. Been a source of confusion, but you can get up to $1,750 for a heat pump water heater. You can get $8,000 for a heat pump as a point of sale rebate, which means it's kind of happens as you buy it rather than having to like apply for it after the fact. And you can also get $840 for an electric stove if you're replacing a gas stove. Now, there's a lot to be figured out. We're still waiting on the Department of Energy to issue its guidelines for the program. Once DOE does that, hopefully in June, then each state will have to apply for its share of the funds, and it's kind of explaining how they do the program, and then they'll have to set it up at the state level. So we're hoping that the first states will have their programs up maybe by the end of the year, probably early part of next year is most likely for most states, but it's going to be interesting how that all rolls out. Delaware's share of the money for electrification rebates is $35 million. I think the total amount for the electrification rebates was something attuned to $4.3 billion, something like that. If some states don't claim their funds, then the states that do have these programs will be eligible to try to claim more money. But for now, it's going to be $35 million for Delaware. The program is income qualified based on area median income. So for Newcastle County, AMI last year for a family of 4 was $105,000. So the program set up that if you make 80% less of AMI, so for Newcastle County, that'd be $84,000 again for a family of 4, you'd be eligible for 100% rebate of your project up to $14,000. If you make between 80% and 150%, so again for Newcastle County family of 4, that would be between $84,000 and $158,000, you would be eligible up to a $14,000 rebate, but it can only be 50% of your project cost. And then above that, you would not be eligible. So beyond federal rebates, there's also a handful of electric utilities around the country that offer electric stove rebates as well. But these are relatively rare and none that I can find in Delaware. So my last bit before I go is to say that I did this myself. So my wife and I, right around this time last year, we have kids that are 8 and 4, and we were seeing all this stuff about, and by the way, environmental groups, health impact of stoves was not really on our radar until a couple of years ago. And like, if you're just hearing about it, that's okay. We were barely hearing about it a little while ago. But our stove wasn't that old. We had bought this house maybe 4 years before, and it was a new stove, but we decided to rip it out and put in an induction stove. And the process was more annoying than I expected it to be. We would call electricians. We would call and say, "You want to do what now? Wait, you mean you want to put in a gas stove?" We went, no. We want you to take the gas stove out and put in induction. But I think things are changing, especially as these federal rebates are coming. I think the attitudes around this are shifting rapidly. But just to say, we've been having a great time. Our cast iron stove pans actually work great on it. That's what we use mostly. And if we have one complaint, my wife likes to joke that her prep time for like chopping vegetables while water boiling has been totally thrown off. The water boils too fast now, and it's just she has to relearn how to do stuff. But anyway, happy to talk about that if you want. But anyway, thanks so much for having me today, and we'll turn it back. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was great info. And as I said before, if you have questions for any of our panelists, John, Michael, Abby, please put it in the chat. And I'm going to now introduce our last speaker. Our next speaker, it's very exciting. I've never had a chef on this climate conversation, so I'm very excited to hear from you. Chef Christopher Galarza. He's the founder and culinary sustainability consultant. He's an entrepreneur, author, public speaker, and podcaster, renowned for his work in kitchen electrification. Chef Chris Galarza is the founder and culinary sustainability consultant for Forward Dining Solutions, LLC, the first and the only firm dedicated exclusively to creating sustainable and efficient commercial kitchens. As the country's foremost expert in commercial electric kitchens, Chef works with clients to sustainably create kitchens that promote healthy, efficient, and equitable working conditions. Chef Chris, you are up next.
Awesome. If I could share my screen here.
Yes, you should be able to do it.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Okay, well, thank you. As previously stated, my name is Chef Chris Galarza. I am the founder of Forward Dining Solutions. I've been a chef for most of my life, actually. Now that I stop to think about it, I've been cooking professionally since I was about 16 years old. Always been interested in the kitchen. I had the pleasure and privilege of working with master chefs, culinary Olympians, going to school and all that fun stuff. So it's been an incredible career, incredible ride. Most notably and most recently, I was the executive chef of a place called Chatham University Eden Hall campus, where we designed and built the world's first fully self-sustaining university campus, which housed America's first all-electric campus kitchen. So there's a lot of lessons learned in that project that I've been now walking through with my clients, and I help them understand what are the real world implications of cooking on electric technologies. So as a company, we, as previously stated, are the first and only firm focused exclusively on this issue. We are a chef-owned company, which means everyone that we work with have been in the industry, know the growing pains of chefs, and can kind of bridge that gap between designer and culinarian. We're experienced working with multidisciplinary teams as well to help achieve sustainability goals. And now through our partnership with Block Power, we're able to fully decarbonize your building, from domestic hot water to solar panels to heat pumps and even financing as well. So we essentially help designers sustainably build kitchens of the future. Now, when we talk about electrification, electric kitchens, we're like a lot of times we talk about induction cooking. We talked a little bit about here, but we're going to go into it in more details. So the way induction cooking works, it's not like your grandmother's, coil stove, the ones that we all know and love and we think of, which are roughly somewhere in the 40 to 50% efficient range. Gas stoves are traditionally at best around 35%. But the way this works is that there's a copper coil underneath the glass top. So you send in electrical currents. These electrical currents go through the wire and just goes round and round. And when it does that, it creates what's called an eddy current, which creates a magnetic field that oscillates the ferromagnetic molecules in the pan. So those ferrous molecules in the pan get excited. They start jumping around. They create molecular friction. That molecular friction is what heats the pan up. And an easy way to kind of envision that is imagine your microwave, right? You turn it on. These little waves go into your food. The water molecules get excited, heats up your food really quickly. We're doing that, but with metal. So we can boil water, as John was saying, in fractions of the time, right? We can boil water in like 90 seconds as opposed to 4 to 5 minutes with traditional gas stoves. So this is a much more efficient way of heating, and we're actually able to work with the molecular structure of the pan, which means there is no more pan warping and things like that. So what are the pros and cons of induction cooking? Well, induction cooking is actually very high efficiency. So we're looking at 80 to 93%. In fact, we're seeing the new induction woks come in as high as 92%. Gas is 35% efficient. Now, I will stress that these are lab conditioned numbers. In other words, the ASTM guidelines dictate how equipment should be tested, and that's how they determine their efficiency. But truth be told, in the hands of a chef, it's actually far worse. Gas stoves, we do not operate them as efficiently as we can. If any of you have been in the kitchen, you would have seen a stack of saute pans with a burner on high with a saute cook just constantly swapping them out, because gas is such an efficient way of heating that we actually have to preheat our pans in that way. And what that does is it drops our efficiency down. So I've seen estimates in the high teens, low 20s, which is really not good, which means for every dollar you're spending on gas, you're not only throwing roughly 80 cents away, but it's not just being thrown away, it's actually going into your space. So you're heating your space, now your electricity bill is going up because now you need more conditioned air and all that stuff. And it's just not a good way of operating your business. But induction also heats up really quickly, which is going to increase your throughput because they're able to bounce back on temperatures and get things hotter quicker. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. There's precise temperature adjustments, and y'all can't see this here, but in this griddle here, there's these little rectangles. And these rectangular pieces here, when you turn them on, displays a number. Now you can set the degree that you want, and it'll stay within 1 degree of that. So it gives you precision that you never thought possible with gas appliances. There's no more idling equipment, right? So you can turn it on and things get hot and start going. There's no combustion, which means no carbon monoxide. There's a dramatic improvement of thermal comfort as well, which we'll talk about. And as alluded to, it'll extend the life of your pots and pans. Fire is a very violent way of heating. It will warp your metal pans over time. It'll create soot, which creates hot and cold spots in your pans. I've worked on saute lines where the sauteed pans just would not stay still. They kept rocking, which has burned me, my colleagues at times, or we just flat out lost food because the pan just tipped over. But traditionally, you would replace these pans every couple of years. Should be sooner, but couple of years is on average. But with induction, I recently gone back to Chatham and I saw that the same pans that I bought in 2015 were still there nearly 8 years later. So if these things are built to last, and it'll save you money in the long run with these ancillary costs. Now the cons, there are definitely some cons. The initial costs, right? In the commercial kitchen, this is going to cost you significantly more than in the residential. What's that cost burden going to be? We're looking at roughly around $10,000 to $15,000 difference in their gas counterparts. But I usually, when I'm talking to operators, I say, if the kitchen's the thing that's making you money, invest in your moneymaker, because your ROI is going to be a lot faster, and therefore you're going to be able to make more money in the long run. Now, the compatible cookware. If you're an operator who's used to buying pure aluminum pans, I'm sorry, it's not going to work. You got to buy yourself some new pots and pans. People oftentimes think you need specialized pans, and you don't, right? If you want to know if your pots and pans work, go into your kitchen, grab a magnet. If it sticks to the bottom, it'll work just fine. Cast iron is a great example. People pass down cast iron pans throughout, like through their family. These things work beautifully with your induction range. But as a restaurant, yeah, I'd say invest in good pots and pans. Most manufacturers only have one line. They would prefer to have one line that's going to work for all appliances. So they don't have an induction line, a gas line, electric line, one used for campfires. Like, they don't have these things. It's just one pot and pan that they want to work with everything. And also there's the retrofit hurdle, such as the electrical capacity. Do you have to upgrade your panels? All these things are valid concerns when it comes to upgrading. But with business, it's good that you invest in your business. So what sort of equipment solutions exist? Truthfully, all of it, right? There's nothing in a gas kitchen that doesn't already exist with an electric counterpart. Combi ovens, griddles, fryers, broilers, tilt skillets, ranges, griddles, you name it. And that includes grills as well. There are electric grills. I haven't personally played with them myself, but I do know of one that's being developed right now that also is going to give you that flare up that people are looking for. So there's nothing that doesn't exist. And that includes electric tandoor ovens and woks. This is a way of allowing us to cook, right? It's a way of allowing us to refine the traditions that we're so accustomed to, while also being good stewards to the planet. There isn't a trade-off anymore. You don't have to say, well, I'd rather be a good steward to the planet, but that means giving up your traditional dishes. That is a thing of the past. In fact, if you went with that electric wok, that 12 kilowatt wok, you would save about 500,000 gallons of water per year, which on the West Coast is as good as gold. But those are again, those ancillary costs that people don't really think about when they talk about transitioning. They normally think 1-to-1 gas versus electric, but they don't look at efficiency. They don't look at, the operations. They don't look at all these different things that we do whenever we're consulting on a project. But let's do that. Actually, let's look at the 1-to-1 comparison. Operationally speaking, how do these stack up? So if you were to go with the gas range, we're going to give this the best possible chance of success. We're going to call it a 50% efficient gas range. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't exist. I haven't seen one, but I've heard talk that maybe it does. So if we do have a 50% efficient gas range where we can produce 38.6 pounds of food per hour. Now, this is going to need some time and elbow grease to clean it. For those of you who haven't done that, more than happy to walk you through it. So the way this works is that you were to break down these grates, right? Scrub them down and put them in a sink with some degreaser and hot water. Then you would take the burner, take a toothpick, and go to every single hole and make sure that it's that there's no debris in there. And you would also soak that. Then you would scrub down this whole piece of equipment, wipe that thing whole down. Then you would, underneath these knobs is a drip tray. You pull this drip tray out, you dump the contents, you pull the foil off, you scrub that down, degrease that down, you wipe that down. Then you put the foil back on, put the drip tray back in, then you go back into the pot sink, scrub all that stuff out, rinse that, make sure all the chemicals off it, dry it off, and then you put it back. Then you light the pilot lights, and you make sure that all the burners turn on and that the connection is good. Now that can take a significant amount of time. I'm talking 20, 30 minutes, if not more. And all the while it can cause burns or fires. You know, you can burn yourself with the heat as well as the chemical burns from the harmful degreasers. Now on the flip side, induction, 90+% efficient, we're talking 70.9 pounds of food per hour. So you can nearly double the amount of food you're producing. So in an era where it's harder and harder to find people to work in our kitchens, we can now nearly double the amount of production each person can do, reducing the chance of burns, reducing the cleanup time, because all that needs is hot soapy water. So even if you spill food or cream, whatever it is, you wipe it off, you move on. Hot soapy water, you're done in 60 seconds. So now you reduce the amount of cleanup time needed. So if you had a staff of 30, for example, and you saved just 30 minutes per staff member when it comes to cleanup, over the course of that shift, over the course of that week, over the course of that month and year, you can start to see where the savings is. On top of that, being able to double the production. So now if you're running with a half staff, as a lot of people are, you're able to produce as much food as if you were fully staffed, while also reducing the amount of time it takes to clean, which then gives you more time or more money to reinvest back into your people. So that way they feel appreciated. And that's how we're able to, in a new kind of post-COVID world, able to stay competitive in the job market. Now, walks, we're looking at 100,000 BTU walk, 19% efficient. We can produce 124 pounds of food per hour. And also note the size of that. It's a pretty large footprint. Now that countertop induction wok, much smaller, 5 kW at 91% efficient, we cook 117 pounds of food per hour. Now, yes, you're cooking less pounds of food per hour than that giant wok, but it's also a fraction of the cost, and it costs less to operate as well. So now you can have more woks in a smaller footprint, producing more food. And again, less waste. So if you were to make the assumptions that you were operating your kitchen for 360 days a year, for 15 hours a day, and that 6 burner gas range was operating at $1 per therm, so you were spending $1 per 100,000 BTUs, you would spend $1,123 a year to operate that gas range. If you were to have the exact same assumptions, but you were spending 17 cents per kilowatt hour, that 6 burner induction range would cost you $1,114 a year to operate. Now, it's not to say that you're going to save $9 by switching to induction, right? That's a pretty lunatic reason to switch. But the truth is that the idea that gas is so much cheaper than electricity is really nonsense. It all depends on how you use it. And when you're using it at greater efficiency, you can then begin to save money there. And in fact, these numbers are a bit fudged, because the truth be told, that national average is actually close to $2 per therm, and the electricity is actually 16.8 cents. This time last year was 14.8. So the cost of electricity has gone up $2 cents per kilowatt hour. The cost of gas has gone up by almost double. So it would cost you less to operate. Thermal comfort is one that people don't talk about, right? The human what's happening to you. So there was an actual study done by Ashtray, and they looked at over 100 kitchens for a week between different climate zones, between summer and winter conditions as well. And they tested cooking, prepping, and dishwashing. Now, the operative or the thermal comfort zone, if you will, was between 68 and 82 degrees Fahrenheit. It found the only time a kitchen was comfortable is if they were cleaning or prepping. But when it comes to cooking, just wasn't the case. In fact, when they broke it down into a different set of graphs, they found that the kitchens were blowing it way out of proportion. So what they thought was the top end, the kitchens were actually up here. Now, the quality of life is one that doesn't get talked about enough in these conversations. This is what we think of as that chefs are, right? They're just throwing around this fire and it looks really cool. The truth is that in those environments, it's actually a hellish landscape. Every chef that I know of has had war stories about chefs falling out, chefs, getting sick and having to leave. The truth is we're working as fast as we can. We're working at breakneck speeds, and at any given moment, we can cut ourselves, burn ourselves, and seriously maim ourselves. I have seen people get sent to the hospital for some awful things. Accidents happen. And when you introduce additional elements like this, there's an increased risk of injury. I can tell you that these conditions were so inhospitable to us that there was a few times where I would look down and see on my thermometer in my chef coat, it would read 130 plus degrees. Now, what does that do to your body? And I can tell you that it's like running a marathon in that heat. And after each rush, the chefs and I would be running to go to the bathroom to throw up. Our bodies would be fighting us every step of the way. But when we go to a non-electric kitchen, it's a different story where it's comfortable. I can tell you that the transition alone, I noticed a significant increase in my mental health. I was much more comfortable. I was calmer. I became a better leader. My staff was calmer and happier. There was less infighting. Our guest satisfaction survey scores went up. Like, it was a completely different environment from the left picture to the right picture. And in fact, we actually tested that to see what was the temperature of the kitchen. We between September 9th, 2019 and September 16th, that week, we saw that there was the outside temperature was between 85 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So that was what we would consider the perfect summer week. If you were to take vacation, that's the week you want to go. And that week in my kitchen, prepping, cooking, cleaning, the whole week, nonstop, it never hit 74 degrees Fahrenheit. In fact, it was on average 70 to 71. So we saw a 60-degree drop from the commercial kitchen to the residential, to the electric kitchen. It wasn't even close. That's a significant savings. And the health consideration, I know that it was touched on, but I just want to bring the point home that we're releasing a lot of these different toxins into our kitchen, right? Formaldehyde, a lot of the things that was already talked about, more importantly, carbon monoxide. Okay. Now, there was also touched on that there was no there was no indoor air quality standards in America. Truth be told, that outdoor concentrations are from 0.03 to 2.5 parts per million. And federal standards dictates that it can't go beyond 9. Truth is, when we're burning natural gas, we're releasing carbon monoxide to the tune of 200 parts per million or more. Now, symptoms of which are nausea, vomiting, headache, and lightheadedness. Symptoms that 2 slides ago all of a sudden make sense, right? It wasn't just the heat, but it was what we were putting ourselves through as far as the toxins we were inhaling. You can make the argument that, yeah, the commercial kitchen has a large hood system, which is great, except for the fact that we're sitting directly over that flame. It has to pass through us in order to go into the hood system. Complications of which are permanent brain damage, cardiac damage, and even death. It's a very serious thing. Now, benefits of electrifying are that there's no more idling equipment, right? As you see here, this gas grill is on. This is actually from Stanford University. A friend of mine was there doing a tour for a project that they were doing, and he asked me, "Hey, chef, why is that on despite the fact that they're breaking down from lunch?" And I'm like, because if anyone wants a burger, they can't just turn it on. It's going to take way too long to get hot, probably another 20 minutes from off to if it was cool to getting it back on. So they just leave it on all day long. Pretty much the 6 a.m. cook comes in and he'll turn all the pieces of equipment on. So that's just running all day long. Again, waste. Reducing the building's emissions, which reduces environmental impact. What folks also don't realize is that in our cities, the number one emitter of carbon emissions is not the transportation industry or any other kinds of industry, but it's actually our built environment. Buildings account for up to 70+%. In New York City, for example, it's 77. Sorry, that's San Francisco. 77% of the emissions come from buildings. In New York, it's 70. Kitchens play a big part of that. The average EUI of a commercial building is around 30, right? The average EUI, the energy use intensity of a commercial kitchen is around 325. That means that kitchens use 10 times or more energy than any other building program, than honestly the rest of the building. So if we're using more energy, then we're emitting more emissions. So kitchens are one of the biggest culprits in building emissions. So to pass all these ordinances, which as of the end of March was 104 cities to date, that, and then to give exceptions to kitchens isn't really addressing the main point here. Your building is going to operate more efficiently, which is going to save you energy and utility costs. You're going to have more precise cooking controls. Now you can tell a chef, hey, can you sear off those short ribs at 435 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 minutes on each side and braise at 185 for 6 hours? That's a level of precision we didn't have before, because it used to be just sear off the short ribs and braise it on medium low. Right, but your sear might be different from my sear. Medium and low is a big gap there, which, contrary to popular belief, you can't under and over braise meats. So it would contribute to folks going to a restaurant on a Monday and getting a completely different experience if they went on a Friday. Now you can eliminate that. This is a dramatic improvement of thermal comfort, as we just talked about. It's going to extend the life of your pots and pans. It's going to be easier to clean. It's going to save you on chemical costs. It's another potential savings that people don't talk about. If you're used to spending, say, $5,000 a month on chemicals, but all of a sudden you don't need all those chemicals to clean your line, that's going to come down. Those are further reduction and further increase in savings. Faster throughput, which means increased productivity, which means your dollar per labor hour is also improved, and it's going to improve your air quality. Now, finally, I just want to finish off with a couple of slides. One is to talk about a resource that we developed with the William J. Worthen Foundation. We co-authored this guide, which is the most comprehensive guide ever written on the subject. Chapter 5 specifically talks about kitchens, both residential, multifamily, and commercial, and it's 100% for free. So if you go to forwarddiningsolutions.com, you can go under the resource tab and get a link to go and download that for yourself. And finally, we are commissioning a study along with PSE Healthy Energy to go into kitchens and find out exactly what are our exposure rates to the hospitality workers. So if you or anyone you know has a commercial kitchen and wants to participate, please sign up to this email address, or you can go again to forwarddiningsolutions.com. There's a tab that you can get yourself signed up. We're going to hopefully start going to kitchens sometime this summer. We are paying participants as well. We will share the data we collect with the owners. We will not share where we got that information in our study. This is going to be the first study of its kind. No study in the world has ever looked at exposure rates to hospitality workers specifically. It's always been residential, and then they kind of extrapolate or guess what it could be for the commercial space. So this is going to be a pretty unique study, and I'm really excited about it. And all that being said, I know I dumped a lot of information on y'all, but we're done. We're at the end. So questions, please. And thank you as well.
Thank you, Chris. That was really great information, fascinating. I will now how the part of program will look like, and can I think I'm still seeing your slide, Chris.
Oh, there we go.
Well, thank you so much. Now we have 3 perspectives. We have health and energy and like moving away from fossil fuels, and that's the underlying thing, is that we know what is causing climate change is that burning of fossil fuels that we do, and we know there are injuries to our health, and it is a huge, humongous task, right? We have this built environment based on fossil fuels. We have been using gas and oil and coal based energy in our homes, in our places of worship, at work, but how do we move away from fossil fuels? It's a huge task and a huge ask. So how do we do it as soon as possible to really get to a carbon-free future? So for our climate conversations, we do a small group discussion. So we are going to kind of have people join 3 small group discussion, small rooms where we'll go over, just talk about what are the solutions available and how can we get to it. But before that, I know Abby has to run. So if you have any questions for Dr. Abby, you can unmute yourself and ask that question, and then we can head to the small group. Looks like, is there anybody has questions for Abby? Well, I'll just say thank you, Abby, for joining us, and really appreciate that information. I will be sharing your slide, and we'll be sharing this recording with everyone, and we'll take it from there. But thank you so much. Thank you. And I feel like there's just a small group. Maybe, I don't know, if we don't even need us, need to divide ourselves in another group. We are only small group left, but I saw some questions flying by. Sally, if you have any other questions left, I know John Michael answered some of your questions as well. So if you have anything, if you want to unmute and ask, you can do that.
John Michael was very, very helpful. I've just, in my own personal situation, I'm seriously considering getting a heat pump hot water heater. But it looks like if I were to get it now, then I would lose the $1,750 rebate that might be available next year.
One thing that we're very interested to see is if DOE will issue any type of ability for retroactive rebates, because I think the industry is just and there's plenty of different parts of the industry, whether it's installers or manufacturers, are a little worried about people starting to make that exact calculation you just made, which is I need to wait 8 months. And so we're hoping to see some type of, as long as you can show the project was done by X date, and not before X date, then you'll be eligible for it. So that hopefully going to be included some type of guideline in the DOE rules coming out soon.
That would be wonderful news. How would what's the best way to stay on top of that?
That's a good question.
Rewiring America. I mean, I follow Rewiring America. They're pretty on the top of if you're interested in electrification, I think that's a really great nonprofit to keep tab.
And Building Decarbonization Coalition is a good one too.
What was the second one?
The Building Decarbonization Coalition as well. They're pretty fantastic as far as following all that stuff, and they work on both coasts.
Great, thank you. I'm quite familiar with Rewiring America, but I didn't know about the Building Decarbonization Coalition. Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And Energize Delaware is also working towards that, so you could utilize Energize Delaware's resource and the federal one. I'm sure you can combine the two, but I don't know if they have anything currently, and I don't know if you know anything different, but they are working on a heat pump incentive.
They do. They do have $1,000, or I think it's $1,100 rebate on hot water heat pumps. But still, if I don't need a new hot water heater, and so it would be really nice to get the $1,700 rebate as well.
Yeah. We are also trying to, share this information with our congregations. How can they electrify everything that they have in their built environment? Some of them are pretty old and still burning oil, and so hopefully we can work something out with Energize Delaware. So that's where we are. Are there any other questions for our 2 panelists?
I would like to say thank you to both of them. That's great information. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's very kind of you.
Jamie, do you have any questions? I thought you put something in the chat.
No, thank you very much for the presentation. In addition to my work at the Unitarian Universalist Society of Mill Creek, I'm also working with a group of folks trying to bring co-housing to the Newark area. And so we are certainly discussing, the idea of doing an all-electric community. And I think that's going to be very much in our plans. But this is very helpful for me because there's so many good talking points and important things to consider as we go down this path.
Yeah, and in your comments, you mentioned the Rachel Carson Eco Village. So yeah, we are working on that project as well. We're very familiar with it. It's actually funny because I was a chef at Chatham when they first proposed that. So I was in those meetings early on, and I was like, man, that sounds like a really cool idea, and I get to work on it. So it's like serendipity, right? So
It
it's super cool.
is such an amazing project,
Right?
and there's really been some growth and some
Yeah.
neat co-housing, and I'd love to find somebody at the University of Delaware who might be interested in a similar kind of collaboration.
Yeah, for sure. If there's anything I can do to support you in your work, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you very
Absolutely.
much.
So Christopher, there is another thing. It's I know that you do these kitchen demos, like the
Mhm.
cooking demos and induction, and hopefully we can have you do something in Delaware where folks can actually come and
That would be
see.
awesome.
It'd be really fun and interesting. That's how I came to know about you. But there's another thing is that it's also changing mindsets about electric cooking, cooking productions. It's also behavior change, because if
Right.
we've done that all our lives, and to change that, there's a learning curve. And when we show people ways to do that, it just makes it more easier. So maybe we could organize something, maybe in one of the congregation's kitchens, and our hopefully there's some kitchen out here in Delaware which is induction based.
That would be great. Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right that it takes a little bit of kind of rewiring your brain a little bit to realize, like, and decouple yourself from the myth that without gas you can't produce good food. It's just because it's not true, right? Cooking has everything to do with fundamentals and techniques, and has nothing to do with your fuel source. So it doesn't matter if you're sauteing on a campfire or an induction range. A saute is a saute, a braise is a braise. Those things don't change. So it's about helping chefs and helping culinarians, whether it be residential, commercial, find that and then help them realize, like, once you decouple yourself from that, the possibilities are truly endless. Because if folks don't realize that every international culinary competition in the world is all electric. So the greatest chefs on the planet cook all electric. In fact, most recently, one world-renowned certified master chef, Rich Rosendale, has opened an all-electric and ventless kitchen in Atlanta, Georgia. So that's the nation's first, both ventless and all-electric. So the possibilities are endless, and it just, once you realize that and you get away from those stigma, you get away from those biases, possibilities are truly endless. And in fact, John, you talked earlier about how cooking is a small amount of the emissions coming out of the home, and you're absolutely right. And the reason why these companies are fighting, sorry, my dog just had surgery recently, so she's not comfortable. So the reason why they're fighting tooth and nail to get people to resist the change by tapping into the stove is because that's the one that we read. Like, we don't care how our water's heated, we don't care how our air is heated, we don't care how our clothes are dried, but we care how we cook. So if they can tug on those heartstrings, then once they have gas in your home for cooking, why not get things for your space heating? Why not get the gas in for your where that and that's where they make the bulk of their money. I think gas cooking is only like 12% of their money, because we really only cook maybe twice a day. Really?
Yeah. Those are good points. And
yeah, I just wanted to, along that point, Delmarva Power customers, neighborhoods that don't have gas already, you have to do, I don't know exactly what it is, but some sort of petition, and then you have to have X number of people put down a $250 deposit or something like that before they'll convert a whole neighborhood to gas. And one of the issues is that, and I don't know who could take up this charge, but I think that realtors need education
Mhm.
because they're telling people, oh yes, convert to gas because it's going to make your house so much more valuable. And
Mhm.
it's like, no, put solar on your house and get high efficient,
Appliances, yeah. Oh, you're 100% right.
yeah, but it's a huge problem to me that you've got all of these realtors that are telling people, oh no, you should do this, and they're perpetuating the problem.
Yeah,
As in
and
Delmarva, but
yeah, no, you're 100% right, which is why last year and this year, we've partnered with the National Association of Realtors to do a working. So last November, we were at their national conference where we did a 2-day demonstration. It was like 3 or 4 demonstrations per day on electrifying kitchens. What's that mean? How to cook on it? All these different things. And then we've been asked to go back there this year as well. So we are doing that outreach. Another thing that we want to reach out to is the insurance folks to see if like maybe they can give an incentive, like, hey, you can have lower premiums because now you have less of a incentive for house fires and things like that. Now, to be perfectly clear, traditional electric stoves are more of a fire hazard than gas because those coils take so much longer to kind of cool down, but induction's instantaneous, right?
Yeah.
So there could be some kind of some avenues there. But yeah, it's going to take outreach and get people educated on what the realities are with cooking on electric or cooking on induction rather, and understand that there's nothing holding you back except for your own biases, right? John, you pulled pictures from my favorite tool to use in a presentation, which is the Nissan Leaf commercial, because it's super effective, right? Everything around us is electrified. We're really only talking about a few more things, right? We're 98% there, and in fact, you hear a lot of pushback from places like people who are making a lot of noise, like the governor of Florida. But the truth is that Florida is the #1 state for all electric building design. 78% of their building stock is electrified, always has been. And why is that, right? Why are the southern states so far ahead of us? The rest of the country in electrification. That's because in the event of a natural disaster, it's a lot easier to get electricity up and running than it is to get gas. So if in the event of like an earthquake, it's going to take you months to get the gas infrastructure back up and running, as opposed to a couple of weeks with electricity.
It's great for building resiliency.
Exactly. So, I mean, folks love to point to the fact that our grid isn't there yet. It's dirty or this and that. But like, I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time, and we can begin to electrify while they're beginning to upgrade the girls' infrastructure. Because as John said, over like year over year, our grid's getting cleaner and cleaner. So by making this switch now, you'll be part of the solution as the grid gets cleaner and cleaner.
Great. Sally, you had something to add?
I just wanted to say that I agree 100% with Ann's comment, and Christopher, I'm glad to hear about the education efforts that you're undertaking, and it's contractors too who need to know about this. We have someone in our congregation who just got a new switch from oil to gas and didn't get any information from the contractor about heat pumps. And there's that so frustrating, that whole new network laid out in Mendenhall Village of gas over the last few years, and then a whole bunch more development going on off of York Lynn Road in Hockessin. Without the education, it's kind of heartbreaking to see.
You're right. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've talked. So go ahead.
Yeah, we did bring it up with Energize Delaware. How do we educate these contractors to bring them on board, and also working with realtors? I think that I'm thinking maybe we could do a kind of conversation with the realtor community for sure, and really, talk to we can really have a dialogue kind of educating them, bringing them on board as somebody who can really talk about the value of adding electrification,
Mhm.
whether it's
And-
solar or electric.
And builders too, for sure.
Yeah.
And Contractors.
Yeah. So like that we are doing outreach and we are looking for ways to kind of connect with those industries. And I will say that like in a couple of days, actually 2 days from now, on Wednesday, there will be a Chasing Carbon Zero with Nova. We're going to be featured in their latest episode docuseries. I'm not exactly sure which film. I'm not exactly sure, but we filmed with them. So there's going to be an in-depth look at what climate change looks like in America and what the solutions exist. Because yeah, it's not just about what are the problems, what are the problems, what are the problems. If you don't come with solutions, no one's really going to listen. So yeah, talking to those contractors, talking to those industries, talking to everyone who's going to have a role to play in our buildings. That includes policymakers.
Mhm.
I'm hoping to set up a meeting here soon with the mayor of New York and discussing that. We're also doing a few things which I can't talk about at the moment, but if it works out, we're going to be taking this kind of the whole point of what we're trying to do is kind of make cooking make induction as ubiquitous to cooking as gas is. So that way people can be like, what are you afraid of? So because if you watch those like cooking channel shows right now, like the Great British Bake Off, that's they're cooking on induction, right? My wife and I love watching like the holiday baking championships and Halloween baking and all that stuff, and they're cooking on induction most of the time. Like you can see, like they're beginning to transition.
Yeah.
So they don't talk about it. So we're hoping to kind of begin the process of getting those networks to talk about it, explain what's going on, and educate their viewers. One of my biggest pet peeves with cookbooks and cooking shows is that they don't teach you how to cook. They just teach you how to make a recipe. Right. So teaching you how to cook means explaining the whys, like what's going on, the culinary theory, but also helping you understand what the equipment does. And because if you can understand why a dish works and how the equipment works, and you can probably come up with some creative ways to use that equipment and then come up with some creative dishes. And it'll be, I was told a long time, you got to know the rules before you can break the rules. So I want everybody to be able to break those rules sensibly, but they need to know what they're doing first.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Great information. Thank you, John Michael. Thank you, Christopher. Thank you, everyone for joining us. Really interesting conversation. And glad, hope you got something good information from this one, and we'll stay in touch. And the next two conversations we do is in May, and it's in person. On Lisa Locke is featuring in a new book called Love Your Mother, and they're featuring 50 people from all different 50 states, 50 women talking on climate action. So we will be hosting one on May 16th here at Route 9 Library, 5:30 p.m. and the other one in Lewis on May 9th, Lewis Library. So, and those two will be in person, and we'll be talking about the book and doing a climate conversation. But thank you so much for joining us. I know just few of us are left here, but I will be following up with some resources and the presentations that our presenters shared. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank
Take
you.
care, everybody.
Great
Thank you.
discussion.
Thank you.
so
Thanks
much.
so much.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.